In other lessons, we looked at how we can construct the 60, 120, and the 90 degrees angle. Those angles we constructed are very key. So now let's look at how we can construct other angles using the concepts we learned from the previous videos. Note that bisecting an angle is a very key thing that we do. Let's say you've been told to construct an angle of 30 degrees. How can you go about it? To construct that 30-degree angle, what you need to realize is this. 30 is half of 60. So the first thing you need to do is construct your 60-degree angle. I'm sure now you know how to do that. So I've constructed it. This is J and this other one is K. So I could draw a line from J passing through that point, but there's no need. Pen in my compass to point 2. Notice it will be using the same arc, and then I'll stand at point 2 without changing my radius. I'll make another mark like that, and then this new point that I have here, we can call it L, is going to give me the point that I need to make that 30 degrees. So if I am asked to draw an angle of, let's say, 15 degrees, it's not very difficult. I'll just need to bisect 30 degrees, which means that 15 degrees requires me to divide this angle I'm just from drawing into 2, and then I'll have 15. That's how you should actually think for most of the basic angles when you want to construct them. Now let's look at how we can construct the angle 135 degrees. When we say it's 135, it's very difficult for us to imagine it. If it's very difficult, you can get your protractor like that on your 45 set square, and then look at 135. If you look at 130, it's paired with 50. So if we move 5 degrees to the left, we have 135 being paired with 45 degrees. By pairing, I mean this. If I'm moving from this part, I have 130 degrees. If I move, can have 135 if I have that mark. Now, if I move in the other direction, I have 45. What this simply hints is that for me to get 135 degrees, I just need to kind of measure 45 degrees from the other end. Now, you notice 45 is half of 90 degrees, right? So, for me to get this 135 degrees, the first thing I need to do is get a 90 degrees. And I'm going to do it with the first method that we covered. So if I have a line, let's say this line is LM, and then I want 135 degrees to be at the point L, what I'll have to do is extend at point L like that, then stand at point L using any radius. It shouldn't be too big, it shouldn't be too small. I mark an arc like this, then I bisect. When I do this, it's just basically me making an angle of 180. Then I can stand at the 2 points that have been created. You can say this is point 1, this is point 2. Stand at point 2, open to point 1. Why am I opening to point 1? Because I want to bisect this angle that I have, which is 180. There I have it. This here is my 90 degrees. join this point here with point L like this. I'm not going to use point 3, but I'm going to use this point here. Let's name that point to be O. So I'm going to get my compass, standard point 1, open to point O, and then strike an arc like this, just like we always bisect our angles. And then now I have my point which I can call N. Joining point L and N, I have my 135 degrees. So when drawing our 135 degrees, there's a point when we need to be careful. When we have this point 3, we should pick point O. And point O is the intersection of the line from 3 to L and the arc which is 1, 2. That's how we draw our 135 degrees. Let's look at how we can draw the angle 75 degrees and 105 degrees. .75 degrees and 105 are very similar kind of angles. The first thing we need to do is have our baseline. Let's say our baseline is PQ. Let's say we are making that 75 degrees at point P. So we extend standard point P, open our compass to a particular radius, draw an arc. Immediately we draw an arc, you notice we have points 1 and 2. We stand at point 2 and open our compass to point 1. We draw an arc like that. We then stand at point 1, draw another arc. Then we're going to have point 3. Next, we join point 3 to point P. After joining point 3 to point P, notice we're going to have a point here which we can say is point O. Now, we've constructed our 90 degrees. We need to realize a very important thing. If we use our protractor once more to kind of realize a very important relationship, it will help us remember how to construct that 75 degrees. So remember, when we wanted to construct this 90 degrees, we looked at 60 degrees and 120. We bisected this angle and then had 90. Now, notice something very important. When we look at the angle 60 and 90, the difference between these two angles, 60 and 90, is 30. And if we bisect this angle, it means we're adding a 15 to 60, which gives us 75, or subtract from 90, which gives us 75. Which means that for us to be able to construct the angle 75 degrees, we need to have a 60 somewhere, right? Great. So to have that 60, what you can do is stand at point P, open your compass to point 2, and then stand at point 2, mark a line like that, and now this point that you have here is 60 degrees. Next, you're going to bisect the angle between point 4 and point O. So if I stand at point 4, I need to open my compass to point O like that, then draw an arc. Without changing my radius, I stand at point O, draw another arc. The new point that I'm going to have here, I can call it R. That is going to give me 75 degrees. You notice most people will show you another way of drawing this, which is kind of more easier to remember. If you use the second method of constructing our 90 degrees, what you're going to notice is this. You're already going to have point 4, because once you mark this arc, you're going to need that 60, and then you need a mark for 120. After you bisect that 120 and the 60, you're going to have this 90. Then after that, the procedure is just the same as what we did. But the concept for making 75 degrees is never different. The first thing is you need to create a 90 degrees, then a 60 degrees, and then bisect the angle between 60 and 90. After you bisect that angle, you have 75 degrees. How can we make 105 degrees? Try pausing and seeing if you can think through the solution and find it, just like we did for the 75 degrees. I hope you paused and tried to brainstorm. 75 degrees and 105 are kind of very similar. Let's go back to our protractor to try to understand what's happening. Our 105, let's say we're using this scale on our left here. We know we will need the 90 if it's similar to the 75, and then we'll also need the 60. This is the 60. If we bisect these two angles, is it true we can have 105? Of course. If we bisect the angle between 60 and 90, we have a 15 degrees added to the 90, which gives us 105. Or basically we are adding a 15 to 60, which gives us 75. In other words, we can say we're subtracting from that 120 to get the same 115. So let's see how that is done. Let's say we have a line XY. Remember, we need the 90 degrees. This time I'm going to use the second method of constructing our 90 degrees. So I'll stand at that point X. I'll draw an arc. After drawing that arc, I'll have a point 1. I stand at point 1. I draw an arc on that same arc I was just from drawing. Then I'm going to have point 2. That point 2 is 60 degrees. Then I'll stand at point 2, mark another one. That point that I now have is 120. To get a 90 degrees, I'm going to bisect the angle that is formed between point 2 and point 3. When I stand on point 2, it's just like extending that arc. Then if I stand at point 2, I'm going to have a mark like that, which I can call point 4. Then I can join X and point 4 to get my 90 degrees. Then, just like we did, we've just realized that if we bisect the angle between 3 and a point here, which is point O, we can have that 105 degrees. So we'll stand at point O, open to that point 3, strike an arc, then stand at point 3, strike an arc. You can see we now have a point which we can call Z. This is how we can construct different kinds of angles, and notice in each of the constructions that we did, I tried to give you the conceptual understanding of how you can remember. If you can really understand how we arrived at the constructions, it will be very easy for you to draw most of the angles. As a simple exercise, you can try constructing angles like 37.5 and 22.5.